This is Every Widow Thing.
Before we start this episode, we do want to give a shout out to Sweet Pearl, Holly's dog. She had to put her down recently, and it brings up a lot of
You're going to make
grief.
me cry.
I know, it does. It is
It
is such a painful thing.
It was really hard.
Yeah.
She was 13 and a half.
Well, and it's also an extension of your husband.
It was just weird, like all the flashbacks of like when Toby and I picked her up from, when she was a puppy, and when we showed her to the boys, and it's like weird. All these flashbacks were just like floating through my head.
And seeing your kids as they've grown up with Pearl.
Now, the hardest part was watching Zach say bye to her.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. Anything our children go through hits us twice as hard.
Yes.
Today's episode is brought to you by Roger Brooks and his team at Strategic Investment Management. As an Austin-based fiduciary financial advisory firm, Roger and his team bring decades of experience and empathy to help people regain financial control through life's ups and downs so you can move forward with confidence.
All right, well, we are ready for our guest. Most people have heard of hospice, but they really don't understand what that means until they are living it in real time, which is not the best way to learn about hospice care. So we have a great expert here. She's my good friend, Arnetta Robinson. She is currently the chairman of the board for the Pacific Hospice and Palliative Care Foundation. She's a community relations manager at one of the largest hospices in Orange County, and she is here today to educate us on all things hospice. Arnetta, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Arnetta, I'm Lacey.
I'm Holly. And Keira's not here today.
We're pretending. Well, actually, this is Keira right here.
That pillow. We should have brought her face.
She's looking really good.
Yes, she's on a European.
She's visiting her oldest daughter.
My pleasure. I'm so honored to be here with you guys today.
How long have you been in this field?
I've worked in hospice for about 22 years now.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So you've really seen it develop, because I would assume that when you first started, people weren't as aware of it or maybe using it as much. Is that a fair statement?
Fair statements. I actually got into hospice because my sister died without hospice. And so that was my impetus to really get involved with hospice work. I worked in healthcare as a clinician, and she really didn't get the best end of life experience. And I really wanted to that was my passion. I let my mess be my message, and so transitioned and pivoted into hospice work. I always say I'm really great at loss. My father was killed in the line of duty, sudden death. My brother was killed in a car accident, and I had another brother that was actually killed. And then my sister died without hospice, and 3 years ago, this Mother's Day will mark the 3-year anniversary of my mother's death. She had a beautiful end-of-life experience, and I was able to give her the gift of hospice.
You are definitely an expert on loss and grief. So we're really excited to have you here with all of your knowledge and personal experience. Can you explain what is hospice? Like, just start there.
Yeah, let's start there. Well, hospice was introduced in about 1972. It is a benefit that is covered by most insurances. And in the nation, we really look at the Medicare Part A benefit. So it is a program designed to meet the clinical needs of an individual, the emotional needs of an individual, and the spiritual needs of an individual at end of life. So it's a comprehensive interdisciplinary team approach consisting of a physician, a nurse, a supplemental bath aide, a chaplain, volunteers, and most important, our bereavement coordinator, who follows our patients for 13 months after a loved one has died, just to make sure that the family is coping well. There are different levels of care that are integrated into the hospice program to meet all the needs of an individual. Most of our patients, we see them make intermittent visits. However, there are another level of care other levels of care in hospice that we tap into if a patient has a crisis situation. And we coordinate equipment, supplies, and medication. And our goal is really to walk alongside our patients and their families during this time in their life.
Who qualifies for hospice? Because I feel like sometimes it's someone that is 2 weeks away. Sometimes it's 3 months away.
When would we know when that time is? Like, how do you know when it's near?
I'm so glad you asked that, because unfortunately, people get hospice too late and we can't really make an impact in their life. So most of the time, it's the national length of stay for hospice in the nation is 14 days. And so really it's that shift. It's when we, in the medical community, we have to be brave enough to open up the conversation. So if we're looking at an individual and based on their clinical needs, if we ask ourselves, would we be surprised if this individual died in the next 6 months? And if the answer is no, we wouldn't be surprised. We should open up that conversation, lean into having these uncomfortable conversations, because if you do qualify for hospice and you do get on sooner, studies show you live longer and you live a better quality of life, and your family is really supported and prepared to what is coming up next. So it just provides a good death and a good dying experience. Even though this work is so hard, it's so important when we start to see patients who have nutritional changes. That's a big shift. That's, our bodies are very robust. And the biggest system is our digestive system, our immune system. So we see these patients bouncing from home to hospital to skilled nursing facility, and they have an overall decline. So as we walk through life with our loved ones who have serious illness, start to pay attention.
Because I think for a lot of people, you kind of think, oh, well, if I call in hospice, we're giving up. We're basically just pushing them into the light, so to speak.
I mean, we have to do that cultural shift in the nation, because hospice is that forbidden taboo word. We think if we say it, it's going to happen right away. And sometimes it does. The shortest amount of time I've had a patient on is a couple of seconds, and the longest is 4 years on hospice.
Oh, wow.
That was going to be my question. There's not a time limit on hospice like that Medicare covers, or?
As long as a patient qualifies, the beauty of hospice is we're always evaluating to the needs of our patients. And sometimes our patients graduate from hospice because they actually get better. I had to discharge a 106-year-old patient from hospice.
Oh,
wow.
It's just doing this work, and it's so important that we access at an appropriate time, and patients can be on hospice as long as they're having a decline.
I think mentally people start to lose their will to live if they're constantly going from their house to their hospital, to a rehab place, back to the hospital. They just get exhausted, right?
Tired.
It makes sense that they may, I certainly think I might live longer if I was just at my own home with my family. But can you explain, what does it look like? What exactly is happening? I know there was a bed that was delivered and then a big bag of drugs that they put in the refrigerator or something. But can you kind of walk us through the process?
I'll walk you through. I always say we labor coming into this world, and we also labor going out. No two deaths are alike. No two hospice experiences are alike. So and this is the beauty getting hospice in sooner, because you get to create what's important, what you want to do, how you want to live your life. So the first step is getting an order from your physician. Once we get that order, we make an appointment, we go out, we sit with the family. And I always say, the clinical information, I just put that aside. I want to know about the person. I want to know what their goals are. So we sit down and we evaluate for things like equipment, which is covered under hospice, medications. We do keep a comfort kit. So that bag of medication in the refrigerator, it's a comfort kit. And most people assume that we come in with morphine and we're going to give you morphine and you're going to die really soon. Some people use it, some people don't. It's just in an emergency. And then we start to assign a team, a dedicated team that's going to walk with you. These individuals are there to support not only you or your family. So we talk about from a clinical standpoint, we talk about pain management. We have a social worker on the team that offers emotional support, having difficult conversations, sometimes with family members on processing the whole idea of dying, making sure you have your affairs in order, your mortuary in place, because we do contact the mortuary when a patient dies. We also offer that spiritual support, so you get that. And it looks different. I mean, I've had a patient who recently, he went skydiving. I had a patient
that was on hospice?
Yes. If you have the energy, if you have a pulse, you're alive.
Really, the point is that you have all the say in how you want to live these final days. So if you want to go skydiving, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, you always think about it because on TV they show hospice as they're all still lying in the bed just waiting to get their morphine and dying. And I'm realizing now that that's not it at all. It's just there for them as they're transcending or whatever.
Transitioning, yeah.
But I think that's how our society thinks of hospice. I mean, my dad was on hospice very briefly. I was not around because it was 2 months after my husband had suddenly died. But I remember on the phone with my mom, and I was like, you need to call hospice. And she said, well, that's for people that are dying. And I'm like, he's dying. And I wish she had called much sooner because she would have had, it sounds like what you're saying, so much more support rather than feeling alone.
The biggest part of what we do is training and education. So we start to talk about what you're going to expect, what you're going to see, how that's going to look. And especially since we are experts on different end-of-life disease processes, we're able to really talk to that. The biggest thing is end-stage nutrition. I come from a family of 9. Food is, the heart of our family. And so even when my mother was kind of at that point where she was transitioning, she stopped eating and drinking. And my brother was like, we need to get her an IV. She's dehydrated. My sister was making food all the time, but her body just didn't eat it. Mm-hmm. So we start to have these conversations about what that looks like. I always say it's okay to die dry. Our bodies are designed.
It's okay to die dry. You should get a t-shirt made.
That's my quote. It's okay to die dry.
Well, I think people assume that their bodies are feeling the same as a healthy body. So like if I'm dying of thirst, that's uncomfortable and I don't want my loved one to be uncomfortable. So they've got to be starving. We've got to give them some food or some water. Is their body handling it differently? They're not feeling what a healthy body would feel?
The body's a beautiful thing. I talk about we labor when we're coming into this world, we labor when we're going out. Our body knows what to do. So when you're born, you don't just start off with a steak and eggs. You start off with breast milk and formula. Then you graduate to cereals, to finger foods, to hearty foods. You kind of go in the opposite direction at end of life. And that dehydration that people experience at end of life actually kicks off some hormones in our bodies to help with pain and aid in with those types of end of life discomforts. And our digestive system slows down. So that food and hydration sometimes doesn't have anywhere to go. So we always talk about risk and benefits of everything. Sometimes I've had a patient who had a Big Mac and a shake before they died. I've had patients who've gone 3 weeks without any food or anything. Again, it's just very unique to the person and the individual. So there's a lot of myths about hospice.
I'd love to know what it actually looks like. I've read a lot about it because of what's happening with my mom. Mother will probably be the one with the McDonald's because she made me go get her one while I was there. And just stuff like that, like what you look for, like how would I know that it's actually in the process of, let's just say it happens while she's at this
facility? Like, how would I know?
You may see changes in the color of skin. You may see an individual who has very drastic temperature changes. You may hear that rattle, respiratory issues that come up. Our body's really laboring. So sometimes you don't have any of these things. Sometimes an individual can have all types of complications. So it really does look different from each individual. But that's the beauty of hospice. We're there to kind of explain and guide the family what's normal and what's not normal. The one big thing is people think that hospice is going to come in and they're going to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right with you in your home. And the reality is most of our patients are on routine level of care where we're making intermittent visits. And caregiving is not covered by Medicare or most insurances. Long-term care insurance covers some caregiving expenses, but the sad part in our nation is that it falls on the families. So it's something that we don't discuss, or the cost of caregiving, to hire private caregivers to come in to assist with the day-to-day care. We call that activities of daily living in our little world here. The bathing, the grooming, the changing, who's going to be there to shoulder the responsibility of taking care of this loved one. And that's something that people assume hospice is going to come in, or hospice is a place you go. Hospice is a service that comes to you. Now, state to state, there are hospice houses in some places. California, we have a hospice house here in Orange County, but it's a daily rate that people have to pay to live there.
My grandmother was at a regular facility, which is probably what my mother would be, and then that they would bring in hospice. So that's why I was asking, like, how would they know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the medical team has to say, look, there's no. I think that's what you were saying earlier, right, Arnetta? That y'all need to educate the medical team and make them understand. Look, when you think there's nothing more that you can do, that's when you suggest hospice. Like, the doctors typically suggest it?
I would always advocate. Unfortunately, 85% of healthcare professionals are uncomfortable talking about death and dying. I run into that all the time. You have to be an advocate for yourself and your loved one. It's sitting down with your team and saying, this is my goal. Or if you have cancer, with your oncologist, I'm in the fight, but at this point, I just don't want any other treatment options. I want to explore something else. It's a shift going from curative to
my friend's father did that. Yeah, he just said he was in the hospital. They were doing all this stuff. They were about to transport him to another hospital, and he said, I'm done. I don't want to do any of this. I just want to live out the rest of my days at home, watching TV and hanging out. And that's when hospice was called. So yeah, it's a hard thing to be able to recognize that your loved one, I mean, we don't want to say goodbye. So
we don't, and it's hard, and you have to listen to your loved ones. I just sit there sometimes and listen. And when I hear an individual say, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to go to the hospital, I just want comfort. Mm-hmm. Those are key indicators of that shift and that transition. And it's so hard because I see so many patients going through so many unnecessary treatments because their loved ones don't want to let them go.
Right. Well, and with Lacey, her mother is in memory care, and she's nonverbal now, right?
She doesn't talk much. She's still eating really well, so I always thought that was an indicator that she was still doing okay. But from what I'm hearing from you, someone can eat a Big Mac and then the next day they're gone. But she sleeps an inordinate amount of hours. Most hours she's asleep. She's awake probably 4 a day.
If we start to see an individual that's sleeping more, they're withdrawing, they're it's we have to be brave enough to say, can we have that hospice conversation?
Mm-hmm. And that's all it is in the beginning, just a conversation. It's not like you say the word hospice and people come running in and grab your loved one and take them to your house. You know, I mean, it is a conversation.
Yeah. Talking about this earlier, we all should have an advance directive. We should all talk about what we would want at end of life. And it's the biggest gift you can give to your loved one is filling out that advance directive. Do you want aggressive treatment? What does that look like if you're in an accident? What type of life-saving measures do you want? Because having those things memorialized, anybody over 18, I say, should have an advance directive. In the state of California, we have the PULSE form for our patients who we suspect have a year or less, and it's a physician order for life-sustaining treatment, and it talks about your code status. Do you want CPR? Do you not want CPR? Do you want comfort treatment or full treatment? Mm-hmm. Do you want a feeding tube or not? Or opt not to have a feeding tube? So these are all conversations that we should start having when we're healthy.
But Arnetta, part of the conversation, it sounds like, I mean, and Lacey, I'm sorry we keep using your mom as an example, but she is sleeping all the time, but she's eating. I mean, like what advanced, what communication could you have had with her before this? What are those questions? If you're sleeping 20 out of the 24 hours a day, what do you want us to do? Like,
because there's nothing they can do in terms of, there's nothing to dial down. There's nothing to, she's still breathing. She's still sleeping. She's still eating. And she doesn't move much. They're taking care of all her basic needs now. She's not walking. She's not doing any of that anymore. But there's nothing to
take off.
She has a pacemaker.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't know.
We just started. It's our job to demonstrate that a patient, when we do our evaluation, we're taking the whole medical history into view.
So you don't. So what I'm hearing is you partner with the family or the patient. We don't have to have all the answers and know everything when we go in. We just say, "Hey, we'd like to have this conversation," and then we'd
like to have the conversation. Yeah. And then the evaluation, when we're pulling all of those medical records, when we're kind of demonstrating that a patient is appropriate, because there's going to be a shift. There's going to be something that happens. It's either an infection or a crisis situation that is emphasis to hospice care, when we should be having the conversation. Right now, there's signs. She's sleeping 20 hours a day. She's more dependent on her care needs. Mm-hmm. These are things that you should start having a conversation with her specialist, with her doctor, and saying, can we open up the conversation? Can we talk to hospice? Can I get an evaluation to see where my mom is? Because knowledge is power. If a patient is appropriate for hospice, getting that support in, walking alongside, because the reality is hospice is more for the family than it is for the patient, because the family is getting that support. They're getting that emotional support. They're getting their affairs in order.
And you brought up an excellent point that I want to get back to. People tend to think that hospice means you have a hospice person in your home 24/7 to handle all of that person's needs. That is not true. Sometimes you're seeing the hospice person once a week. They're always available and you can call them, but your family is responsible for. If that person can't walk, you have to have somebody that can get them to the bathroom. If they have medications that need to be administered or daily things like brushing their teeth and bathing and all of that, there's not a person from hospice in your home 24/7. You have to pay extra for that.
So I assume you can bring in hospice to like the memory care facility, correct?
You can. We go anywhere a patient calls home.
Okay. But it's great to know that if, for example, your mother, she's in a facility already where she's provided all that care, but now you want hospice, that's a possibility, and she doesn't have to leave that facility. She's just getting extra care.
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities that you have with really leaning into the hospice as a whole. Our studies show that just the impact that we make in the quality of life. And, there are other services. We talk about, a lot of people mistake palliative for hospice care. I would say palliative care is for those people with serious illnesses, and they are still seeking treatment. They have their care team, all those specialists that they see, their primary care doctor, and they still want to engage in their care. And it could be what that looks like for a young patient who has cancer, young mom. Maybe her pain isn't managed. So that palliative team is that support that wraps around her to talk about how they're going to manage her pain. Or it's a social worker coming in to talk to her children on navigating the disease and what that looks like for them. And that young mom with cancer can go and live a full life and be on palliative care for 5 years, versus another patient who is maybe 90, doesn't want any aggressive treatment, has cancer, and now is looking at her options, not ready for hospice, but still exploring, what her options are. She has a care team, a palliative team that can come and talk about goals of care, and that could be a bridge to hospice. Mm-hmm. But the misconception that palliative care is hospice, or palliative means that you're dying, that's not the care. It's just, I have a serious illness and I need a little more help. And the palliative team is really that compass that helps you navigate. And there's a lot of palliative programs throughout the nation. It's just finding access to that palliative program. Versus hospice is really, you're transitioning. You want that comfort, you want that support, and you don't want any curative needs.
As far as support from hospice, is it the same if you're in a home, if you're, have an illness or dying in your home versus in a facility or a hospital?
Okay, so with the only difference, there's 4 levels of care that are built into the hospice program. First level of care, one of the levels of care is routine hospice. Most of the people are on that, where we're making intermittent visits. The core team doesn't change. You have your physician, you have your bath aide, you have your social worker, you have your chaplain, volunteers, bereavement coordinator. That core team, no matter where you are, that is your team. Your supplies, equipment, medication, all paid for. The levels of care are a little different. So if you're at home, we're looking at 4 levels of care. The routine level of care, like I mentioned, we're making intermittent visits. Then you have continuous care. So if we get a call in the middle of the night, some things we can handle over the phone, some things we can't. We have to send out a nurse. That nurse got there, you're having respiratory distress, pain out of control. It's not managed. We may put our patients on what we call continuous care, where we deploy a nurse that is their bedside to really do hands-on care. And then we reevaluate that. And if the patient is stable, we go back to intermittent visits. If not, we continue that. If there's a situation where we can't control the symptom where the individual is, there is general inpatient level of care for those individuals that are in a crisis situation. We can't control the symptoms at home. Again, we're reevaluating that, and we do discharge a patient back to wherever their living situation was, if they can. If not, they do end up dying in that general inpatient unit. If a patient is at home, we do look at respite. There are 5 consecutive days of respite. Those are the level of care.
And remind me, what's respite? What's respite stand for?
Respite care is 5 consecutive days of respite. So we always are looking at the caregiver. Do they have burnout? Medicare does have a carve out called respite care, where we find a skilled nursing facility so that the patient can go and give that caregiver a little rest.
Yeah. It's a tough, tough job.
We will be right back. Imagine a financial partner who meets you exactly where you are, acknowledging your grief and taking the time to listen, empathize, and truly understand what matters to you. Strategic Investment Management can help you plan a course that honors your past while embracing your future. Whether you're worried about tax implications, paying off debt, or stewarding your asset distributions, Roger's team can make a plan that's aligned with your family's needs and goals. For more information, visit www.strategicim.com or give them a call at 512-341-9898. Again, that's 512-341-9898. Tell them you heard about them on Every Widow Thing.
And now, back to the show.
Does hospice ever say no? Do you ever go in and you're like, oh man, this is a 108-year-old man trying to take care of a 106-year-old woman?
I have that a lot. That's a scenario. We don't want to say no to anybody. We want to help. We're in the business of helping. So it's sometimes getting in there and figuring out what resources do we have. And unfortunately, the resources are limited. There is a financial impact to people with serious illnesses and the care that is required. And I think that's something that's not discussed. We're not talking about it enough. Because it is assisted living. You have a monthly bill every month that you have to pay for that care.
You said that hospice typically is covered by insurance, but does it depend on your insurance as far as deductibles and things like that? Or is it free?
Yes.
Like, what's the story there?
I always say that it's that book that you just get once a year that goes over all of your benefits, and you usually just stick it in the trash or on a desk or buried away somewhere. You always want to make sure that you pull that out, that you call if you're thinking about hospice, good idea to call your insurance provider and saying, do I have a deductible? What percentage is covered? Most of the time I find that hospice is pretty well covered. I mean, occasionally it's a 80-20, 80% covered, 20% out of pocket with private insurances. Medicare covers it at 100%, and you could find your hospice benefit on medicare.gov and search hospice benefit. It's right there. But it's a good idea if you're thinking about hospice to call and know your benefit, know what to expect.
Can you tell us what it looks like on the last day of hospice?
I always say death is a social event. It's not a medical intervention unless you have complications. Mm-hmm. So what it looks like varies. It could be very peaceful where the patient is just, they have breathing changes. Sometimes there are complications with the end of life experience where they may be experiencing respiratory distress, and the hospice team is there to control that. Mm-hmm. If we know a patient is transitioning, we send our team in for daily visits. So we're touching base every day to make sure that a patient's supported. And sometimes that's not just a nurse. That may be our social worker for emotional support. That may be our chaplain for spiritual support. So it looks different.
And then after the person passes away, hospice.
You call hospice.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. You call hospice. And we call the mortuary. And depending, some people want a little more time with their loved one. So we coordinate with the mortuary, but we call the mortuary. That's another benefit of hospice. If you die at home without hospice, you do have to call 911. If you die with hospice, you call the hospice team.
Okay.
Yeah, why would you call 911?
Because someone died.
Because they have to confirm that they're dead. They have to.
Yeah. Sometimes the coroner has to be involved with hospice. It's just calling the hospice, and we coordinate the mortuary.
What do we need to look for in hospice care?
I always say interview, just like you would if you had a serious illness. These are the most important people. They're coming into your home or wherever you call home. You're allowing them to provide care for your most precious possession, your loved one or yourself. It's always asking, are you going to have a consistent team? I always say, can I talk to another patient or family that you've serviced? Really, at word of mouth, asking friends, family, even your physician. I mean, my mom never talked about death and dying. She would always say, Arnetta, stop talking about what you do. Nobody wants to be depressed.
Oh, right.
But when she really embraced it, she went to one of my community events, and we had this gentleman his name is BJ Miller. He's a palliative care doctor, and he was talking about how at his hospice house in San Francisco, they sprinkle rose petals on each of the people that die before they go to the mortuary. And my mom just got this idea, and she says, Arnetta, okay, we need to plan out what I want. And she did. She said, when I'm transitioning, I want you to order flowers every 3 days. So there's roses there for everybody to sprinkle. And I would have never guessed. And she planned her whole funeral too. And it was a surprise to me because she had doves that she wanted us to release, and she knows I hate birds. But it was beautiful because she got to do that. And so it's just finding you have to connect with that person. I mean, anybody can come in and tell you what they're going to do, but you have to really trust in the team that's going to provide and walk alongside you. So I just say interview 3 hospices. Make sure that they have a dedicated teams to meet each level of care, and their response time, and how do they support that? Because when you have an emergency, you need to know that your team's there.
All good things.
Really
I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I'm not too young to sit down and write out like things like, I want some rose petals on my face. When I want them to play some Duran Duran music while I'm transitioning, and
I teased my mom.
Those are the things.
Yes, it is. My mother, before she was in the facility, they have everything all written out. The 2 of them do. And I said, look at you, still controlling things even after you die. It's kind of relieves you of the stress of wondering.
Yeah.
We have to change our thoughts about death and dying, because everyone's going to do it. And there's so much fear around it and so much secrecy and silence.
This is the biggest event of your life. Why shouldn't you plan and celebrate that? Again, there is sudden death, there's gradual death. But as hard as this work is, I do find beauty in this time in one's life. I see beautiful things happen. Funny story, I had a lady who was the barrier of hospice. She didn't want to go on hospice, and her daughter was like, Mom, why? Why do you want to go back to the hospital? And she's like, it's the best time. I have all of these great, when I call 911, the firefighters come in and they're nice, good looking. And then I go to the hospital and you get to see these good looking doctors. And, when I'm at home, I only have the caregiver in this small space. And if I go on hospice, I can't go to the hospital, and the fire department's not going. The firefighters aren't going to come. So I says, "What do you want?" And she goes, "I want a hot guy."
That is hysterical.
And I always think, I was like, okay, I just say the worst. I'll try to make it happen. I can't promise it. So a big part of what I didn't touch on is our volunteers. So there are a certain number of hours that we have to have in hospice provided by volunteers. So I found a volunteer, a guy. He was an actor, did like
hot guy
theater, and he would come and visit her once a week.
Oh,
and
that's so cute.
So much joy. And then you lose a lot with some of the treatments. And we had a patient, and she lost all of her hair, her eyebrows, and she's like, Arnetta, I just want some eyebrows. So the foundation was able to give her some eyebrows, some tattoo eyebrows.
Aww.
And so you see, family members. I had another patient who hadn't seen his brother in 30 years because he just couldn't afford to make the trip to California. So, having the foundation support to get his ticket to come so he could see his brother.
What's the name of the foundation, Arnetta? Because you can donate to the foundation, and then they are able to provide these kind of Make-A-Wish lists.
That's what I was thinking too.
We just changed it to Living and Dying Pacific Palliative and Hospice Foundation. So it was a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. I was having a hard time with just saying palliative.
Palliative. We really wanted to focus on hospice is about living. So Living in Dying Foundation. So
I like to know that I could have a hot guy at the very end. I may not have him now, but I could have him at the very end.
I'm really curious now because can you share some other like interesting last wishes or whatever? Or I need some ideas.
Yeah.
We had this one woman, because I get invited into these conversations, and she just had this beautiful conversation with her daughter. And it's where I got my funeral playlist idea. So she had a list of everything that she wanted playing when she was actively dying, and then at her funeral playlist. Sometimes people, want it very private. They want to be alone. And sometimes that just happens. Sometimes people they have their loved one that sits right next to them. They go to the bathroom and then their loved one dies. Well, I just think that's protection. They wanted to protect their loved one too. Let me just share one of mine, because we have medical aid in dying in California. It's not recognized where patients could actually take medications to end their life. You talk about those ethical dilemmas and everything, but it is legal here. So I did have a patient who said, like, Arnetta, I just want to have a date with you. And I was like,
no.
I just said, okay. So I called my fiance and I was like, I'm breaking up with you for about an hour. But he wanted to save Danishes, and he just wanted to share about, life and how you should enjoy it. And it was a great conversation with his sister, both of his sisters. So it was, some of those conversations just mean the world to me.
Share with our audience some things that you know for sure, as Oprah likes to say.
Just enjoy life. Don't sweat the small stuff. And really, you get an opportunity, knowing that I know for sure one day, I don't know when, I'm going to die. We all are. We should really go out and articulate and get uncomfortable talking about this part of our life. And when we do that, we get a better end of life experience.
Like a birthing plan. I never did, but lots of people did. I'm not that big of a planner, but I'm going to plan for my death. I love that you want to create your own environment. However, you don't have to go. You can go on your own terms, I guess is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've also made me realize that your child should have that. I didn't even think about that. He has like certain things done, but there are certain things that we still have never talked about.
The reality is, if you have an 18-year-old or above, they should have an advance directive.
But it can be very much more specific. It sounds like you really need to sit down.
A deeper conversation about exactly what.
But I think immediately my 18-year-old would say some stupid stuff. So I don't really want to know because he'll change his mind. Like an 18-year-old's idea is going to be very different.
Yeah,
You're going to have the conversation every year.
You do. That's what I say. Every year, pull out your advance directive and update it.
Yeah, I'm sure we can go online and find some really like deeper questions, not just a form, but like really go deep into what you should be thinking about or considering. Right?
Yeah, there's a great form called 5 Wishes. It's a great advance directive tool, but there are so many out there.
All right, you mentioned about volunteers. I would love to know. I'm assuming because this is the medical field in general, I think they're in dire need of more people.
So our volunteers, I even think I almost recruited you one time, Whitney. You played the ukulele, so
yes,
you were willing to come.
Yes.
I had a patient who wanted somebody that knew how to play the ukulele.
Yeah, they apparently wanted someone that was barely good enough to play the ukulele for them, play them out.
I'm learning a lot today.
Well, we have a lot of people out there with a lot of gifts and talents. So not just medical professionals, but We have people that we have a choir that volunteers their time to sing to our patients. We have people with music talents, people who like just to read with our patients. We have a lot of students that volunteer. They are going into social work or nursing. So everybody has a special gift. And if you have the gift to give to others at end of life, then I would always recommend contacting your local hospice. We're always looking for volunteers.
Well, I'm excited now to plan all my death wishes and my playlist, and it changes your perspective on the whole experience, because it is an experience and it's the last experience. So let's make it really fucking awesome.
And you have to make your photo. You have to put your photos that you want shown at your.
Oh, I'm sure, Arnetta, you probably have already thought of this.
You have to make a folder with all the photos that you want shown at your memorial or funeral.
Yeah,
you don't want the wrong ones.
I will share that on my 50th birthday, I gave out cards to everybody in a nice pin, and I said, "Okay, I want you to write down what you would say at my funeral. And I'm going to put it in a box."
Oh,
and
love that.
I'm going to have it read.
Oh, you didn't read them? You put them in a box for your
in case
funeral?
you can't make it.
Right. Well, I would be reading every single one of those before I put them in the box.
I might be scared.
I am so grateful that you took time out of your busy day to share with us. And I have to say, it's weird, but I'm a little excited about thinking of all the fun things I'm going to do and make my family do for me.
She's going to be working on her playlist.
I'm going to start my playlist. Yeah, my pictures, hot firemen, all of those things. So thank you, Arnetta.
Thank you.
We love you. I appreciate your
much.
time.
I really admire what you do.
I do too. That cannot be an easy job.
No.
Day in and day out.
It's so
And
hard.
So that's really your special.
Well, thank you. It is a blessing to take care of these individuals. They give me more than I probably give them. So thank you for having me today.
Pearl, give me the side eye. Pearl, do you want a bone?